David Tulis.
I think people of principle should stand their ground and not cave in, not worry about offending people, not worry about being the dissenter, being even, as some might see it, on the outside. This is David Tulis, and I'm on the outside of quite a few things. The outside, the lonely man looking in, right? That's how someone might laugh at me in describing my efforts here on Nooga Radio and at our chief sponsor, Nooganomics.com, to give you might say, a deep state analysis and a very positive, optimistic perspective on the future, which requires, of course, standing on principle and not counting it too much trouble to stand with people who are often vilified and victimized by the mainstream media. Though I must say we are the mainstream media, but we are the one wing of it where there is a perhaps maybe even a courageous perspective, standing on constitutional rights, standing on the rights that God gave us, and not minding whom we offend. And I am glad you're giving me just a couple minutes every time. Joe Carr is running for the federal Senate, and he's a nationalist. Let's just say he's a conservative and a nationalist, and he does not have the free market perspective on the movement of people. And he's very typical conservative, which are folks who are not freedom oriented. I'm afraid to say they're really not freedom oriented. They want to conserve what we have, and that often is to say the welfare warfare state. And they want to, among other positions, they want to keep out people from other countries. They don't like foreign languages and people of odd shades of skin color. But here he is to say something good about Joe Carr. He's going to be speaking tonight in Lincoln County, and it's to the Lincoln County Citizen Action Network, and that group has been vilified by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate group. Of course, that is what it does. It is the leading liberal hate group of all, and its job is simply to label someone as a hate monger or a hate group. After careful study of its website and publications and quotes from speakers and whatnot, it puts it'll put James Dobson and David Duke together as hate mongers. He says Southern Poverty Law Center goes after those who disagree with them and then intentionally tries to malign them, so that's the Southern Party. So if that's the Southern Party that's been critical of this group or Joe Carr, it doesn't bother me one bit. He says there's a quote from a TV station report about his speech today, quoting Zulfat Suara of the American Muslim Advisory Council. He says it's very divisive. It's not good for children. It's not good for our country. And a lot of people standing up saying we don't want this type of rhetoric in our community anymore. And this is something to which Joe Carr says the discussions I've had with this group and they've had with me was always centered around Sharia law and the application of that in our school system and our society and our law. Suwada counters by saying, if you're going to be an elected official, you should uphold every part of the law. You should represent everyone, whether you agree with them or not. So in other words, that statement that you should represent the law, it means effectively you can't critique the Mohammedan theory of social reform. It's a military ideological system that wins converts by not the pulpit, but by detonations. I think the Southern Poverty Law Center is a hateful group, Carr says, of people who are out to intentionally malign people whose good intention just want to see everybody, regardless of race, creed, color, national origin, succeed in the American dream. Another man of great principle under terrific fire. Even today, there's a new quote from a woman alleging that Roy Moore laid down a blanket on the middle of the floor and proposed sexual intercourse. This is a report, and there are character witnesses who have stood up for this candidate for the federal Senate in Alabama. And I want to mention just a couple of things said about him by various people from waitresses to people who worked in offices with the former Supreme Court Judge. Breitbart has a roundup of some of employee former girlfriends, employees, and childhood friends standing up for Roy Moore. One woman, a receptionist, said that she says, "I was the receptionist for Roy Moore the first time he was Chief Justice, and I'm proud of our history." Her name is Marianne Rhodes. For 3 years, starting in 2000, I saw everything that went on in that office, and I've never worked for anybody who was more considerate, honest, or kind. We all enjoyed our tenure there. He was always up and above board. If any of these people who are slandering the good name of Roy Moore had ever worked for him, they would know what a fine person he is. There's also a quote from Jenny Klingenbeck of Birmingham, who had dated Roy Moore. She said she's known him for 40 years. Roy and I briefly dated when I was in my 20s. While I was around Roy, either just the two of us or with other people, he was always a true gentleman, treating me with respect and courtesy. I can honestly say that I've never I never have seen or heard any inappropriate remarks or behaviors while he was around me. There's another woman, Jamie Moses, who worked at a barbecue place, Uncle Sam's BBQ, now closed. She was in her 20s, waited on him and his family. He was friendly and respectful. He knew many people dining there and spoke and shook hands with everyone. Not once did he make me feel uncomfortable. Working in the food industry can sometimes be hard, but Mr. Moore's kindness to myself and staff did not go unnoticed. Also, a woman who knew him in school, grammar school, going way back when he was just a lad. He was later my football coach in my high school days, and was always such a kind person. Never a mean or hateful word to any of us, only kindness and utmost respect. Have been friends with all of his family for many, many years. Never heard any mention of any such behavior in all these years. Have seen him at the local church several times with his knees bowed in prayer at the altar. Takes time to listen to people. Just a wonderful Christian man. And then there's also a woman, mother of 3 girls. Her name is Doris Mason. She's known him for over 50 years. She met him first when she was dating a first cousin of Roy Moore, Dennis Mason. She says, Dennis and I married in 1965, eventually had 4 children, 3 of whom were girls, and we frequently visited his childhood home prior to our marriage. Roy has been nothing short of a true gentleman towards me, my daughters, and anyone else I have witnessed his interaction with. And there's a family friend, Angie Johnson. She says, I'm acquaintances with several members of Roy's family. I've never known Roy to exhibit anything other than appropriate behavior during our times together. She says, again, no behavior exhibited other than respect and mannerful. During that time, Roy had written and recorded a 45 record, which he bought over and gifted to my mother. I do not understand waiting years and years to make accusations unless there are political or monetary gains to be made. And another woman speaks of implicit trust in him. In other words, someone whom you would trust yourself with if you were fainted. You would entrust that yourself, your lethargic body to this man to take care of you and put you under a cover and watch out for you in your fallen, temporary fallen or insensate state. So, and these are again not, they don't prove anything, but they do suggest that there is honor among even great men such as Roy Moore, who has stood against. He has stood against the main things that we can call the demolition of Christian ethics in the West. And here our country has fallen repeatedly, destroying the unborn and making a deconstructed wreck of marriage by statute. And on the point of marriage by statute, I would just say that you, my listener, you have a right to marry. Okay, you can marry apart from the statute. And the fact that Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam and his Republican Attorney General, both of them Presbyterians, by the way, and I think at least one of, maybe both are elder, at least one of them is an elder in the Presbyterian Church. They have allowed the whimsical theory of judicial supremacy to control the operation of statute in Tennessee. And so if the statute, if you live in a state where the statute tends to allow, well, that the statute's been eviscerated effectively by Obergefell versus Hodges of 2015, the queer decision. If you live in a state that pretends now to not have a marriage statute and allow anybody to marry, Well, then why marry under statute to begin with? What does it mean if it's been deconstructed? And you have a common law right to marry, and that is because God gave marriage to individual men and women as a gift from the beginning, right? Prior to state, prior to the church, marriage is a creational right. It does not belong to the state, and the state really can't. If it can allow two men, if it can allow Joe and Harry to marry, one with a gut and one with a lot of hair, then it can have a dog and a woman marry, right? Or an orangutan and a child marry, or a threesome marry. One of the threesome being a horse. You know, these are things that are all within the realm of human ingenuity. If you have the statute as your controlling authority, and we really don't. Though Tennessee is not a common law marriage state, and if you want to marry a common law under our crumbling routines in this legal routines in the state, you have to go to Alabama to consummate your nuptials. So that just go to Bridgeport. Parking lot might be fine, but maybe you can rent a church there and have your nuptials there. There are a few people who stand their ground on marriage. There are a few people who stand their ground on the state prohibiting the protection of the unborn. And there's only one candidate, only one notable candidate, I would say, speaking of candidates, in the country now has this perspective. He is an abolitionist, and his name is Dan Fisher in Oklahoma. He is a minister and is running for governor with a very quirky campaign, and his goal is to not be pro-life anymore. Right? We've had enough of pro-life. We've had enough of pro-life in Tennessee. We've had enough of pro-life organizations in Washington, in Nashville, and their job is simply to maintain the money coming in and to say things about regulating the killing of children, make it healthier, right? Make sure that the abortionist has hospital admitting privileges, make sure that his clinic is licensed. And I read a ruling a couple years ago here in Tennessee how there's an unlicensed abortion clinic, and the argument was correct. If it's a constitutional right to kill your child, then the activity cannot be licensed, and this clinic is operating defying state regulating authorities without a license. And that argument is true. If it's true that you can kill your child, then it does not require any license from anybody, period. Then that's it. And that is absolutely correct as a legal position. Now, Dan Fisher says that abortion is murder. He says over 5,000 babies are murdered by the baby killers a year in that state. And it violates the law of God, thou shalt not murder. And it also violates the appropriate provisions in the Oklahoma Constitution. Every newly conceived human being, he says, is a constitutionally protected person, and the right to life is not contingent on his successfully escaping the womb. In other words, you have a right to life prior to the moment of birth. The pro-life politicians we've elected to protect the preborn have chosen, and here those whom he is against. He's against pro-lifers, right? Pro-lifers are feckless. They are ineffectual. They've done nothing since 1973 Roe v. Wade. We've elected them. They've chosen to regulate abortion as health care instead of banning the barbaric practice altogether. Consequently, our state government has abandoned its most basic moral duties, the most basic moral duties to protect the innocent and establish equal justice under the law. How can you kill a boy or girl if that child has not been convicted of a capital offense? How is that possible? How is it that the police will protect the baby killers, the sheriff's department will protect the baby killers, though here in Chattanooga and Hamilton County, by God's grace, we have for 20 years now been free of the notorious baby killing center, Chattanooga Women's Clinic, the history of which you can read nowhere else, the complete history, nowhere else but from my hand. And that is at the website of our chief sponsor, Nooganomics.com. In some states like Colorado and California, if he says some states such as Colorado and California can defy D.C. by legalizing pot and harboring illegal aliens, surely, he says, Oklahoma can defy D.C. in order to secure the right to life. And that's what he promises to do, use everything in his power to uphold the right of unborn Oklahomans. These are boys and girls. These are boys who are black. These are boys who are white. These are girls who are black. These are girls who are Hispanic. These are girls who are white. There are no doubt some Orientals in that state as well, and he is intent on defending them. And also, in part of this concept from Dan Fisher running for governor in that state, relying, as Roy Moore is, on the evangelical vote, right? The evangelical Christian person who says he loves God, who goes to church, who tithes, who has some concern for God's laws, some concern for the Ten Commandments, and tries to live a moral life, abstaining, as many do, from the state factory school in that state. In both states, Alabama and Oklahoma, there is this strong contingent of people who are Christians and who are just very frustrated. They're frustrated for a right reason, partly because they've been mistaught from the pulpit, and they've not been perhaps reading their Bible as faithfully as some of the pagan kings made note of its provisions in the Old Testament. I'm thinking of Artaxerxes and Nebuchadnezzar, both pagan kings who had very fine things to say about God, particularly the law of God. Now, just mentioning Dan Fisher, another one of his ideas, the right to life being chief among them, they make him stand out. And we had last week on Facebook a video from his campaign, a very funny video where he makes fun on all the politicians' promises to do this and to do that, and pretending that he's just playing along with that. And then he suddenly gets very serious at the end of it. And we are live on Facebook, by the way. You can tune in on the David Tulis Show. That's me, David Tulis, 9 o'clock every morning. Tell a friend about me, and boost my listenership by 100%. If I add one person to you, if you add one person to my listenership, then I'm very happy, man. I am impressed by numbers, as you probably can guess, right? Also live on YouTube, Dan Fisher cares about state sovereignty, and he says Oklahoma should be governed by Oklahomans, not by bureaucrats sitting in Washington, D.C., or elected officials from other states. And he quotes James Madison as saying the powers delegated by the Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. In other words, they're not enumerated. There are many, many, many. There's many rights reserved to the states and their people, as there are probably individuals who can think of something that they'd like to do as a matter of right. And he cites the 9th and 10th Amendments added to the Constitution as part of the Bill of Rights to protect the sovereignty of the states. He says, as governor, I will work to restore Oklahoma's borders by reasserting our state's sovereign right to govern itself in accordance with Oklahoma values, not those of Washington, at least. And another part of his campaign is to audit everything. I will insist that every government agency and program be thoroughly audited and justified, so that every farmer, rancher, business owner, and employee in Oklahoma can be confident that every dollar taken, obviously by compulsion, right? That's how that works, is properly spent. And so both Roy Moore, the former judge, whom I would, if I met him, I would say Mr. Moore, and I probably would have to explain that I try to honor the limit in the Constitution against all former state officials, that there are no titles of nobility, and he would understand that. And I think we probably would smile appreciatively in the half a moment he would give to me in a handshake, understanding that I would call him Mr. Moore. And that's because we don't have nobility, but in many ways we do. We have a state nobility. Senators are called senator. Why we don't call Bob Corker mayor? We call him senator. Even when he leaves the Senate, we'll call him senator because we are obsequious, right? We bow down to the great ones. We bow down to our nobles, our notables, and I think the fact that we have that sort of obsequy is just, it shows how poor we are. It shows how unfree we are, and how we really need, because we're a needy people, we need the great ones, such as Judge Moore. So we call him Judge Moore, even though he's not a judge, and he'll be a senator. So what is it when he's retires from the Senate? Is it Judge Moore at that point, or is it Senator Moore as he receives continuing obsequies of continuing obeisances from people who love and respect him? Not that you shouldn't, of course, but that I think we need to remember that we're not in a monarchical time. Though I think we might be better as under a monarchy than under a president, and that would be because in a monarchy you have the family line, and the father who's on the throne wants his son to be loved and appreciated. So he's not going to ruin the son's prospects with the people. So he's going to limit the damage his reign, his government, or his state does to the people, because it's hereditary, right? There's a hereditary claim upon that seat that he wants his son to be able to exercise, with the son being loved as much as the father himself. Well, this is David Tulis, and I've got a book in the mail by Alex Vitale, and I'm not going to get to it today much. I'm just starting reading. It's called The End of Policing. The End of Policing by the CUNY professor, a sociologist, Alex Vitale, and very, very interesting, with a lot to say about community policing and about the racial diversity programs of the kind that we have going on here. I do hope to, I've got this a review copy. I'm looking forward to reading this with great care. Already marking it up as I go. David Tulis, Nooga Radio. Now I've got some important announcements. Tune in.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, digital FM 95.3 HD4.